Hey guys, it's Crystal Briefs. In this video, I'm gonna go over the reports I've got from the last Dragon Arena session on the 4th of November. I've also uploaded the highlights of Dragon Arena, but it's not necessary to watch that first in order to understand this video. Without further ado, let's look at the first report. Here's the opponent who has maxed castle skin and decent artifact levels, so his stats are pretty high despite the lack of champion pieces. And in this one, I countered his 947 ranged Phalanx by 857 Cav Phalanx, and I had the Cav shield, so it was supposed to be an easy win, but the opponents got much more tier 5, so I didn't win with a lot of margin. Also, the opponent's got a max Jade Worm already, so he's like one of the strongest without any champ pieces. Also, the opponent is using 1-2 hero comp, so he might be on a more knowledgeable end. And I also did 1-2 hero comp as well. He could have done in Phalanx to overturn the result. I could have done ranged Phalanx, but I wasn't sure about the retargeting because I had about 200k more ranged troops, which might negatively affect the retargeting sequence. Somehow the opponent has Black Wing despite the fact that the damage it'll do will be very small because of the low ranged count. And my gear is like this, by the way. In the next report, our side was a near full champ player and the opponent was, I think, half champ but on a stronger end. And strangely, the opponent did a 992, which is a bit foolish choice. Despite the tier 5 count, our side beat that with 857 in Phalanx rather comfortably. The opponent couldn't have done anything better formation-wise to overturn the result. Plus, his familiar and hero lineup is not optimized for 992 at all. In fact, he used Jade Worm at level 2 or 3, which is so much more useless than Griffin. He should have used the ranged shield familiar at least. Also, 3 ranged hero is a huge no-no if you want to use ranged Phalanx, because the 3rd ranged hero will mess up the healthier retargeting sequence. It should be 3 inf heroes instead if you really don't want to put Cav heroes in, although I haven't tested out yet. Next report is also the same person and same formations, but this time the result is much closer. The opponent corrected the familiar to Griffin and it became more like 983 comp, which is a bit better in dealing with inf Phalanx. Since the inf on our side had less access to the enemy ranged, the damage dealt became lower. Also, we had less inf than in the previous report, and the opponent still used 3 ranged heroes. Our side was 1-2 hero comp. It lacks inf attack with 1-2 hero comp, but I think this demonstrates you can still defend a 4-4-2 variant with 1-2 hero comp just fine. In the next one, I won just by a margin. I think at this point the opponent probably had 50% more army attack. I went 10-4-7 kind of comp in ranged Phalanx, hoping to induce the 4-2 for winning mechanism against the opponent's 10-7-3 kind of comp. However, the opponent took that in inf Phalanx and that's doing a lot of damage to my inf. So I countered, but I nearly lost. He used Gargantua, which is a bad choice because their Cav count was really low. So if he had more or less the correct familiar lineup, he might have won. The enemy had a lot more tier 5, but even then doing this well to me is quite admirable. I should have did inf Phalanx in this case. In the next one, our side won. The opponent is probably a 3-5 piece champ player. Our side is a decent 3-piece champ player. We won because the opponent did an 857 inf Phalanx on our 857 ranged Phalanx, which is a counter. The opponent should have done Cav Phalanx. The opponent's got 2-1-2 hero comp, so he couldn't have used ranged Phalanx anyway. And our side was 2-2-1 hero comp, which could be improved by using 1-2 hero comp. In the next report, the same person rallied on my fort with 974-ish comp in inf Phalanx. I don't understand why he stubbornly used inf Phalanx, but I do see he's trying to improve his comp. But still, he cannot beat my inf Phalanx. And he put Gargantua, the Pact 5 again, so not really improving on that aspect. However, he did 1-2 hero comp despite his 4-4-2 variant. This could mean he tried to deal with my inf Phalanx, which is a very reasonable thing to do. Having 1-2 hero comp for 4-4-2 variants is totally valid in order to increase the Cav attack power to better deal with inf. so he might actually be on a more knowledgeable end. To beat me, he had to get away from 442 variants though. Next, we got the same combination as the previous one, the 3 to 5 piece champ versus our 3 piece champ. And the opponent did Cav Blast somehow in ranged Phalanx on our 424 ranged Phalanx. He should have done ranged Wedge to penetrate our ranged and could have won easily. His heroes and familiars are okay, so yeah, just the formation choice. You might think our side should have done ranged Wedge as well, but if you take a Cav Blast using ranged Phalanx in ranged Wedge, the retargeting gets messed up and your 424 Inf will actually become targeted by the Cav Blast once half the range is gone in ranged Wedge. So in this particular situation, ranged Phalanx was the best on our side. In the next report, the same strong monster gear player hit in my fort. He did a Cav Blast-ish in ranged Phalanx. I think a bit of ranged and inf he got was a mistake, and he actually did ranged Phalanx that would have countered my ranged Wedge. However, I had a lot of ranged in this one, also with Hellrider and the ranged shield. My familiars were pretty much optimal. Maybe Jade Worm could have slightly improved, and as you can see, the opponent has his inf all dead. Any damage on inf is a sign of unfavorable mechanism occurring to 208, which gets defeated quite significantly like in this report. In this case, he's got an inappropriate number of ranged, and that messed up the retargeting sequence. I'll play the battle movie 2 times the speed, so please adjust the speed on YouTube if you want to watch it more carefully. This report is also super interesting in terms of the retargeting sequence. Our side was 875 ranged Phalanx, and the opponent was like 13 to 5 ranged Phalanx, a weirdly inf-heavy comp. At a glance, it looks like 442 winning mechanism was induced on our side, but if we pay a closer attention, our 875 received all the subsequent damage on inf, which looks a bit off the conventional mechanism. And if you look at the battle movie, there's something worth investigating that might give better clues as to how retargeting sequence is determined in a ranged-on-ranged situation. Currently, we know distance between squads is a huge factor in determining the retargeting sequence, but we also know that's not the only factor, which thus far nobody has elucidated to my knowledge. Or there could be a more overarching rule than the distance that can also explain exceptions in retargeting sequences. I'll play at a normal speed this time, so bear with me. I see quite a few interesting stuff going on, so I'm gonna definitely look into this, but feel free to write your thoughts on this. In the next report, our side lost just by a bit against a decent 5-piece champ, and the enemy comp is quite weirdly cav heavy.
I think there were quite a lot of mistakes in filling the rally for 208. I think our side did Cav Phalanx, which is a reasonable choice, but I think taking that weird comp in ranged Phalanx or ranged Wedge could have won easily, since the opponent's ranged is too low that even 857 type of comp would induce a mechanism similar to 442 winning mechanism. But most importantly, the opponent didn't have ranged hero but still did ranged Phalanx, which is a huge taboo. The opponent probably didn't see they got that much ranged, and our side looks fine in terms of the familiars. In the next report, our strongest lead got nearly beaten by a 5-piece champ. Both did ranged Phalanx. The opponent did 10, 7.5, 2.5 kind of comp with a lot of tier 5s. However, our side had enough inf attack power to prevent the 442 winning mechanism from occurring, so there's a huge stat difference. And I don't remember clearly, but we were starting to get the edge in Ancient Remains, so we had more army attack. But our side could have just taken that in Phalanx and improved the result. And of course, the opponent couldn't have overturned the result with what they got in the report. Also, his familiar is not optimized clearly. Ranged shield familiar should be used regularly, but not always for a 442 variant. Moving on, our side lost this one despite the stat difference. Our side is a decent 7-piece champ player, and the opponent was probably a 5-piece champ at best with significantly lower castle skin. But we lost, and you'll see why when we look at the report. Our 857 in Phalanx was countered by the opponent's 947 ranged Phalanx. Ranged Phalanx counters in Phalanx in this particular case. I think our member thought the enemy was gonna use Cav Phalanx and tried to counter that, which is fine, but I'd probably went with Cav Phalanx simply. One more thing to note, our side did Cav Shield and it actually activated. But looking at the movie, the Cav Shield wasn't consumed to the fullest effect, meaning the Cav Shield was still active at the end of the battle, so its effect is not the best. In this case, I think Imp Shield would have improved the result better, or possibly even overturn the result for our side. The next report is a bit more interesting. That stronger Monster Gear player is attacking one of our decent 3-piece champ player, and the result is very close. Both used ranged Phalanx, but if you look at the details, you can see that the retargeting sequence is actually in favor of our side. Our Cav is attacked and our troops are attacking the enemy Imp, which is a typical winning scenario for us. But the reality is the tier 5 and stat difference was too big even to win in this scenario. And this was what could happen if you aimed too high with a 424 ranged Phalanx. In the next one, LH Maddie came for one of our decent 2-piece champ lead, and our side got absolutely smacked. And this is what usually happens against an Emperor. And LH Maddie being lazy here, using 5 Pact 5 familiars. I can tell he's not very serious about Dragon Arena. Like, if he started optimizing familiar lineups for every comp, even Baron level account would experience hard time beating LH Maddie. The next report is a ranged Phalanx on ranged Phalanx situation, and our side won by a lot, which is actually bizarre if you look at the details. The retargeting sequence is actually in favor of the opponent receiving damage on their Cav, but at this point I think we'd seized almost all the Ancient Remains, and also the opponent was just 5-piece champ, and our lead is nearly full champ, and the opponent is not getting a lot of tier 5 anymore, so it's reasonable. I don't think there's a way to overturn the result in favor of the opponent. And here we come. In the next report, I tried against a maxed account, really strong one with the 055 and won by a huge margin. But note that we've got 200% to 250% army attack as of this point. LH Fied pretty much gave up towards the end, so practically I wasn't a statistically weaker player. The mistake he did, though, is doing 2-1 hero comp in a Cav dominant 424. That's like the optimal prey for 055. So over 75% of Cav is gone in the opponent, adding a lot of casualties. And his hero comp was like this. 2-1 hero comp is too vulnerable to 055, as I said before. The 2 imp heroes doing so much disadvantage here, and I've got some mechanistic explanations for that, which I'll do in later videos.
And in this case, with 2-1 hero comp, the opponent would have fared a lot better in Inf Phalanx. If the statistically so much stronger player did Inf Phalanx, that can actually beat a well-designed 055 with much greater odds than doing ranged Phalanx. Next is the climax. I tested if my 055 works against an Emperor, and it did with a really juicy hit. Again, we got the Ancient Remains, so it does not really reflect what the result would be like if it hits in real War of Wonders. We also got more tier 5s, which is unlikely in a real situation. Maddie doing 5 Pact 5 Familiars, which means he's not serious again. The problem again is the 2 Imp heroes, as I'm constantly saying. By the way, the damage he's doing is much greater than the hit with the previous maxed account. This might be the result of army HP debuff on his gear. He's got 14% army HP debuff from his Emperor pieces, so that automatically results in about 16% increase in damage sustained on my side compared to the damage any maxed account does. Plus his insane army stats and Baron Jewels and stuff like that. For those of you who's new to my channel, the debuffs works in a multiplicative fashion on individual and the army stat combined, tested by multiple parties, including myself. So 14% army HP debuff would reduce my army HP by 140% if I had exactly 1000% HP stat. I've actually got more than that, so more reduction in my stats. Alright, but even then my 055 was able to beat the opponent significantly. If he took my 055 in Phalanx though, he would have won, not gonna lie. This is the kind of situation in which taking a 055 in Phalanx massively benefits, but that's a privilege of a statistically stronger players. For most people, if you saw a well-designed 055 coming, unless you've designed your comp to be resistant to 055, you should pull from the fort. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Hope there's something you learned from this. Thanks a lot for watching and see you later.